Today, I'm super excited because we're jumping into part 3 of a 4-part series that, if I'm just honest, I've just loved. I've really enjoyed this series. The series is entitled Thriving in Babylon. And the question we're asking during the series is, how can you live a godly life in a culture that's always changing? How do you live a godly life when culture changes? And we know this is true because culture changes all around us. Culture is always moving, it's always changing. And it feels to me like culture is getting increasingly dark. You don't have to look very far in politics, in the world of entertainment right now. It just feels like our culture is getting increasingly darker and darker and darker. And when our world changes, what do? And throughout this series, we've been looking at the life of a guy from the Old Testament named Daniel. Daniel is one of the books in the Bible called a major prophet. It just means the book is a longer book than other prophets. And his story is fascinating because Daniel was just a good Jewish boy, a good Hebrew boy, living his life. And one day his country was overtaken by the people of Babylon. Babylon is modern day Iraq. And they overtook his country. And when they did, they made Daniel and all of his friends their slaves. They were held in captivity. Other times you'll see it in the Bible called exile. And they're held in exile there in the king's palace, Daniel and his friends. And Daniel has this choice to make. He said, how do I stand firm? And how do I love well in this culture that's changing, in this culture of compromise? And so if you missed week 1, we talked about the idea that the first thing culture did to Daniel and his friends was to rename them. And when they renamed Daniel and his friends, he gave them perverted, difficult names, because what the king understood and what I would say the devil understands about us is, if he can rename us, he can rebrand us. If he can give us a different name that we answer to, eventually we'll miss out. Like, our focus will shift away from the plan and purpose that God has for us. Then last week we asked the question, who will we worship? You see, culture's attempt is to get us to turn our focus off of God, off of the one who made us, who loves us, who created us, and to take our eyes off of him and to focus on the things around us, and in doing so, to miss out on our life. And yet, when I read the words of Jesus, his intention for you was that you would have life here and now, and life with abundance, life to the fullest. And so we're asking the question last week, who and what are we going to worship with our lives? Today, I want to ask you a question that really centers around the idea of our time and the things that matter, our priorities. Now, my wife and I for Christmas last year got this really fun gift at our house. I absolutely love it. I'm not a salesperson, but I would recommend you get one just for the entertainment of it. It's called an Amazon Echo. Have you seen these before? These are so much fun, and I don't know if you have one or not, but if you don't, here's what it does. It's this little device that Amazon uses probably to spy on us, truthfully, but it uses this device, and what you can do is you can talk to it. And when you talk to it, you say, hey, Alexa, and when you say that, it wakes up and it says you can start talking to it. Now, you can tell it to keep a list for your groceries. You can tell it if you have the right kind of thermostats. You can tell it to change the temperature. You can tell it all kinds of things, and it's really smart. Now, we don't use it for hardly any percentage of what it can actually do, but we use this as our own personal jukebox. And it's so funny to me because you can say any song you want. You can reach back in time and get the greatest hits of all time. Like, hey, Alexa, play Getting Jiggy With It by Will Smith. And it just plays it, like the best songs of all time. It just plays those songs for us, right? Now, we love it, and my kids love it. Now, my daughter Ella is 3, and she is as smart as a whip. She is so cute, so fun. I am in trouble. I just have to lock my wallet at all times when I'm with her because I just love her and I want to buy her everything. And Ella is in this phase where she loves this movie called Sing. Have you seen this movie? This movie is so stinking cute. It is so fun. It is so funny. As a parent, I've seen every Disney movie, every Pixar movie, every DreamWorks movie. I've seen them all. To be honest, most of them lose my attention. This one is a great movie if you haven't seen it. My kids love it, and it has singing throughout the whole movie. It's so fun. And there's a song towards the end that my daughter Ella just absolutely loves. And the song is called Don't You Worry About a Thing. It's the author who sings it, the artist who sings it is Tori Kelly. My daughter loves the song. And at the end of the song, there's a part where it just starts saying ba ba ba, ba 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 ba. You're welcome, everybody. And she loves it. Thank you. It's good to have my mom in the audience. And so my daughter loves it. And so she'll come up to me and say, Dad, play ba ba ba. And so I'll ask for the song, and she plays it. Well, Ella just figured out that she can now ask the Echo to play music for her, and it's really cute. And so she'll go into the room and be, Alexa. Alexa lights up, and she says, play ba ba ba. The other day, she goes in, Alexa, play ba ba ba. And I'm just kind of minding my own business, and I hear the Alexa talk back, and it says, playing ba ba bubble butts. And I was like, whoa, no. Man, I don't know what you and your mom listen to when I'm not here, but that's not it, right? That's not it. Now, All of us understand that if we give the wrong information, we're going to get the wrong result. If we do the wrong thing, we're going to get the wrong kind of response from it. We understand that as a general rule in life, but the reality is most of us don't think about our destinies through that lens. We don't understand that if we consistently do the right kinds of things, if we honor God with our lives, we're going to get the God-honoring kind of results. And when we do the opposite, when we do the things that God wouldn't have us do, we tend to live under the consequences of it. Now, Daniel understands this. Now, we're going to go today to Daniel chapter 5. I love this story, Daniel chapter 5, and I'm going to read a ton today. There's this fascinating story. Daniel lived in his lifetime under 4 different kings. We've already talked, 2 weeks ago we talked about King Nebuchadnezzar. Last week we talked about King Darius. Today we're going to talk about the 3rd king that he lived under his reign. Here we go, Daniel chapter 5, verse 1. King Belshazzar, and if you're looking for a good baby name, I would avoid that one. King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. Now this is interesting. Now, all throughout Scripture, when you see people drinking wine or drinking alcohol, there is just kind of a general assumption about every single time it's talked about, and it's that the people who are drinking, they're there for the moment. They're there living in the moment, having a good time, not concerned about work tomorrow, the pressure of bills that are to be paid. They're not worried about anything else that's happening around them. They're just kind of living here and now for this moment. There's nothing wrong with having fun, but that's a very dangerous way to live your life. So they begin to drink wine. Well, Belshazzar was drinking his wine. He gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, the first king we read about, his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. Now, these are holy. These are sacred glasses that were taken from the temple that his father destroys. Goes on to say this, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. They were going to take these holy and sacred pieces, and they were going to treat them as common. They were dishonoring God in this way. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines, they all drank from them. It goes on to say this, as they drank the wine, they praised the gods, lowercase g, it's the gods, plural, these fake, made-up gods of the Babylonians. They praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, all items that are inanimate, all things that God himself created that could never be worshipped because they have no life in them at all. Suddenly, and I want you to notice this word suddenly is so important because what's about to happen is God's going to interrupt this crazy moment, and he's going to show up in a crazy way. Let me say it to you like this. God will do anything he needs to do by any means necessary to get our attention, because I believe with all of my heart that God's intention as our Father is to warn us, that God's intention is to help us. And so there's a huge difference as a father between correction and discipline. Do you know this? Like my kids all the time start doing something wrong, and I just kind of nudge them the right direction. When you drive a car, you're constantly correcting. You're making small little changes so that you don't run off course. As a father, I'm saying to my kids, hey, be careful. Hey, watch out for that. Hey, don't jump on your sister. Hey, please don't jump on your brother. Like, don't do this. I do that all the time because I don't want to have to discipline. I'm just trying to help them along the way. God does this all the time to get our attention, and I'll say it to you like this. He'll do whatever is necessary to get our attention no matter the cost. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall. So like they're in this room, getting their drink on, having a good time, living in the moment, and all of a sudden a hand appears and starts writing on the wall. And I just imagine the king is like, hold up, what's in this drink? Like, what is happening? But everybody saw it. This was a supernatural, weird kind of moment. He was writing on the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. Next verse. His face turned pale. Now, what would you do? His face turns pale. He was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. I mean, like, you might have to change my pants if I saw this. This is like a relatively good response to this. Verse 7, the king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and the diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, he brings in all the mystical thinkers. He brings them all in and says, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, Flavor Flav, and he will be made the 3rd highest in the kingdom. He's like, this is like Shark Tank. If you bring someone to me, tell them if they can present me with an idea of whatever this means, I'm going to give them 1/3 of the kingdom in equity. That's what's going to happen. Like, this is the moment. I need to know what that finger is writing on the wall. So he brings in all these wise men, all these mystical, ancient kind of thinkers. None of them can interpret what God is writing on the wall. So now he's freaking out. He's like, what am I going to do? And his wife speaks up. And gentlemen, just a side note, just always listen to your wife, okay? And so the wife speaks up and she goes, babe, what about Daniel? Remember him? He works for your dad and the other king. Remember him? He has a connection with God. Let's see if he can do it. So we skip down a few verses, and it says this. So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? Are you that Daniel? I have heard that the spirit of the gods," again, like this plural fake God, "is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. I've heard that there's something special about you. The wise men and the enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it." As a side note, the reason they couldn't explain it is because the mysteries of God can only be explained and interpreted by God and his people. Like no one else could explain it. Verse 16, "Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, watch what I'm going to do for you. You will be clothed in purple. You will have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." And so he says this to Daniel, and Daniel's like, "Cool, I appreciate it, but I don't need that. In fact, let me say it to you like this. I can interpret this. I can, because God will show me what he's trying to say to you. But let me give you a warning, and this is like, pay attention. This is a flashing yellow light. This is a yield sign. This is a caution sign. Pay attention to this in this moment, because this warning is so important that if you disregard it, you're in for devastation. In fact, God tried to get your father's attention in the same way, and he didn't pay attention, and it cost him everything. Are you willing to pay attention? So we skip down a few verses, and it says this. "Instead," this is Daniel talking, "you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven." That you have made this opinion of yourself that you are like a God, and in doing so, you have pitted yourself up against God, the creator of the universe. That God, you've pitted yourself up against him. What are you doing? You need to cut this out. He goes on to say this. "You had the goblets from his temple, from God's temple, brought to you, those holy and sacred ones. You and your nobles, your wives and your concubines, you drank wine from them. That was never intended for you. You took something that was sacred and holy from God, and you desecrated." He goes on, "You praise the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand." Like, you're not listening to the advice from God, but you did not, listen to this, you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all of your ways. You did not honor the God who literally holds your life, the God who can destroy you, the God who can bless you. You did not honor him, and now you're going to have to deal with the consequences. Do you understand? Now, I'm going to say this to you. The book of Daniel was written something like 26 or 2,700 years ago. So it is this ancient book. And Daniel's about to go into a prophetic mode where he says, this is what God is trying to say to you, and I want to submit to you as your pastor. I believe that in the same way Daniel was in a changing culture, we're in a changing culture. And the warnings from God are warnings that applied then, and I believe they apply to all of us now. He goes on to begin to interpret what the writing was. He says this is the inscription that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Now, these aren't words. These aren't words in any language. This isn't like ancient Latin or Arabic. This isn't a word in any language throughout any time in history. This is God speaking. And I said this a moment ago. When God speaks, the reality for so many of us is that we need to be in sync with God in order to understand what God is trying to say, because only God can reveal the mysteries of himself to us. So God speaks. None of the wise men, none of the astrologers, none of the mystical thinkers could interpret this. But Daniel can interpret it. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. He goes on to explain what they mean. This is what these words mean. Mene, the first word, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. God has numbered the days of your life. I think a mistake that many of us make is we buy into the lie that our lives are infinite, that we're here forever. And so what we do is we kind of go from party mode to party mode. We live our lives like the drinkers that we talked about at the very first verse, which is, I'm just living for the moment. I'm living here and now. I'm living not with eternity in mind. I'm living with today in mind. I'm working for the weekend. I'm living here in this moment, and I'm not concerned about anything else. And here's one of the lies that we buy into, and this is so important. We forget that our days are numbered. We forget that our days, the number of days that we have, we forget that they're numbered, that they're finite, that this is all that we have. Here's the challenge. The challenge is, when you think of something as being infinite, that there's no end to it, you tend to squander it. You tend to not worry about it. When you think of something as having an end, when you think of something as just there's a limited amount to it, don't you hold on to it a little tighter? Best example I can give is, how many of you had parents growing up that always insisted that you turn the lights off in your room when you left the room? And when you didn't, they would say things like, do you think we own the electric company? Right? Did anyone else have parents like that? My dad did, and then his joke was always, you feel like with all the payments we made, we'd at least own a part of it by now. That was always his dumb joke, right? For so many of us, the reality is that if your money is tight, if you're living paycheck to paycheck or day to day with your money, that electricity, that turning the light off, that's important to you because that light being left on could cost you a few more cents. And when you do that for a few days, it could turn into a few bucks. When you have plenty of money, you don't really pay attention to it as much. Well, why is that? Because when you have a limited supply of something, you hold onto it tightly. When you have an unlimited supply or a ton of it, you tend to just be a little bit more free with it. Our lives are the exact same way. When you begin to understand that your life is a limited commodity, your time is limited, you only have a certain amount of days, when you begin to understand that, it changes the way you think about everything. Now look what the author of Hebrews says about this. This is so fascinating. We don't know who wrote Hebrews, possibly Paul, we're not exactly sure, but whoever it was said people are destined to die once and after that to face judgment. Aren't you glad you came to church today for the edification, just to be built up, right? Like, there's going to be a day when all of us breathe our last breath. If you've ever sat in a funeral service for someone you love, you know how true this is. A couple months ago, I was sitting in that seat during our first service, first song, and I got a text from my dad that my grandmother, who I loved, had just breathed her last breath. It just knocked the wind out of me. And a couple days later, I spoke at her funeral, and I was reminded that no matter how fun my life is and no matter how many things I have to do tomorrow, that this life it's finite, that there is an end to it. And whether that's that I make it to 36 years old or to 106 years old, there's going to be an end to it. And when you begin to think that way, doesn't it prioritize everything else? Doesn't it change the way you begin to view your days? Why? Because your days, your time, all of it matters. So the meaning, it means that our days are numbered. Then he goes on to give him the second warning. Tekel literally means you have been weighed, and you've been weighed on the scales and found wanting. He paints this picture of a life that's being judged by how it is spent. And on one hand, you've got like all the fun, all the joy, all the parties, all the things that you do that just make you enjoy life. And on the other hand, you have the part of your life that really matters for eternity. And he's like, if we were to kind of weigh these out, the things you're doing, the reality is you're spending your life on things that are just for pleasure and fun and not ever really leveraging your life for the things that actually matter. I just want to submit this to you. There's this challenge. There's this warning that Daniel gives us, that God gives us all these thousands of years later. And the reality is this. We allow our lives to get out of balance. We just do. And so we start living a life where we waste our time. We start living a life where we don't invest our time and our energy into things that matter. And in doing so, at the end of our life, we're going to look back at all of it. And I just want to be able to say before God and those that I love that I gave my life to something that mattered. That I invested my life in something that's going to reap eternal benefits, not just for me, but for people for generations to come. I want to make sure that when the scale of my life is measured, that I don't come out like the king, but I don't come out wanting, but instead I come out having done something with my life that mattered. Now, all of us have a limited amount of time. Well, we just do. In fact, here's some of the ways that we spend our time. I read a report, I looked it up this morning, that said the average American life expectancy right now is 78.74 years long. That's how long you and I are expected to live here as Americans. Here's how we spend that time. This is kind of fun. We eat out 14,411 times, which includes 1,811 trips to McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba, diabetes, right? And so, secondly, we spend 13 years and 4 months watching TV. I love TV. I love sports. I love TV, but like 13 years and 4 months out of our almost 80 years. We spend 5 years waiting in lines. And if you ever go to Disney World, it's like 12 years or something, right? That's how it goes. We spend 1 year looking for misplaced items. And if you're like me, that might be 3 or 4 years of your life, just looking for stuff you lost. We attend 35 weddings. I've done like 3 times that many weddings. We drive 627,000 miles. That's equivalent to 25 times around the widest part of the earth. Now, nothing wrong with doing any of these things necessarily, right? But when you were to weigh your life and weigh your time, was it worth it? Was the 13 years of your life watching TV worth it? What was the amount of time just in the car? Was the amount of time waiting in line? Was it worth it? And now listen to me. There's nothing wrong with having hobbies. There's nothing wrong with doing things that fill your tank, that bring you joy. The word recreation literally comes from which means to do it again, creation, which means we do things that kind of like recreate or rebuild our soul. Nothing wrong with any of those things. Hear me on this. But are you also leveraging your life to do something that matters? when the scale of your life is weighed, will you find yourself having used your life for something that matters, or will you find yourself like the king and left wanting? In the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, said this about our time. He says, it's better one handful with tranquility, which means it's better to just have enough and to have peace, than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. It's better to have enough and to have a life that's characterized by peace and the ability to do other things, instead of having two hands full, meaning you've earned a lot of stuff, but you don't have the joy that comes from it. What would it look like if all of us just evaluated our life through that lens? So we talked about mene, tekel, and the last one was parsin. Now he gives us the singular of that word, the definition in verse 28, Perez, which literally means your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Little historical fun side note, this prophecy actually came true just a few years after this was written. The people, the Medes and the Persians came and overtook the Babylonian Empire. That's what happened. So he says this, your kingdom is divided. If we were to take this and boil it down to a challenge that I believe all of us need to kind of wrestle with, it's this. The challenge is we ignore the warning signs. Do you ignore the warning signs God has for you? You see, I said earlier that I believe God warns us because he loves us. I really believe that often we mistake the warnings from God as punishment. Like when you feel pain, when you feel remorse, when you feel regret, that's God tapping on your shoulder saying, hey, don't go this way. Hey, don't go here. Maybe here's some other signs that you're just kind of missing the warnings from God. One of the warnings that I think is so important is this. The risk of sinful choices increases. Maybe you find yourself constantly being tempted in a way that's like more and more and more. You find yourself tempted to go to this place, go to this website, be with this person, be with this family over and over and over again. And what happens is, as the risk of sinful choices increase, you don't have the courage to stand up to those things. Another warning sign from God, things you need to pay attention to, is that our emotions get inconsistent. So you find yourself just doing all kinds of weird stuff that feels out of character. You find yourself yelling in your car at other drivers who can't even hear you, right? You find yourself like doing things like kicking your dog who had nothing to do with your emotional instability, but your emotions get out of whack. Why? Because it's God just really, in my opinion, trying to warn us that maybe something's wrong. Pay attention to it. The third area that just a warning from God is we find ourselves being less productive. Why is that? Because our focus gets distracted on all the possibilities instead of the thing that we were created to do. The fourth is the most important, which is I can't hear from God anymore. It's possible that because we get our headspace so full of things, voices, of noise, that we never have the space to hear from God. I would call it like this. Like imagine that we all left here and went to a football game today. And you sat on one side of the stadium and I sat on the other side of the stadium and you yelled as loud as you could to me. As loud as you could. There is no chance I'd be able to hear you with all the fans in the place. All the noise in the place. I wouldn't be able to hear your voice. But if we were to do the same thing and empty the stadium out on a Tuesday when there's no football, and we stood there, I stood on one side and you stood on the other, and I yelled at you, you would actually hear me. Why? Because we got rid of all the noise and the chaos. What would it look like if you and I made the decision to heed the warning of God, which is, I'm not hearing from you, God, what's going on? The warning is maybe you just crowded your headspace with too much stuff. What would it look like if all of us made this decision that we're going to do whatever we can with what we've got to get rid of the noise, to get rid of all the stuff so that we can actually hear from and learn from God? Now, if we were to keep going in the story, we're going to pick up in Daniel chapter 5 again. The story goes on. Daniel has described the definition of these three words that God wrote on the wall. Then it says this, then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple. Gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. God elevates him because he's heard from him. Then it says, that very night, three words that haunt me. Three words, that very night, because of the king's insistence on doing his own thing, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. He was killed, put to death, just as the prophecy, just as what God had said. Verse 31, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. This is a bit of historical information that tells us that God was trying to warn the king, but the king wouldn't heed God's command. So the question is this, what do we do with that? So what? Cool, right? What do we do with that information? I have two things that I think all of us can do right now that are very practical. The first thing is this. We have to live with a sense of purpose and urgency. Live with a sense of purpose and urgency. Well, what is this? Well, purpose is this. Purpose is the why behind your existence. You see, so many of us, we understand when we were born. We knew that we are a person. We know how God made us. We know our height, our weight. We know our blood type. We know things about us that make us us, but we don't know why we were born. Samuel Clemens, many people have attributed this quote to him, but it's attributed to a lot of people. It says that there are two great important days in every person's life: the day you were born, and then secondly, the day you discover why. Many of us live a life that's purposeless. We float from relationship to relationship, job to job, career to career, trying to make sense out of life, but we've never nailed down our purpose. As a church, our intention is to help you discover why God made you, because when you discover that, you'll begin to leverage it to help other people. You'll leverage it to help people meet Jesus. It's amazing. In fact, let me say it to you like this, a little timeout from the message and a commercial. This is the reason we do something called the Next Steps class. Our Next Steps class is all about the heart, vision, and values of our church, but the truth is it's really about you. It's about helping you connect to a church that wants to help you discover your passion and your purpose in life so you can use it to help reach other people. Like once you discover that, you'll be a completely different person. Let me give you a little side note. This class meets today at 12:30. I'm going to ask you, if you haven't gone through this, stick around. We got food for you. We'll take care of your kids. The Cowboys don't even play till 4:30. You're good. We want you to stick around for this today because we want to help you discover your purpose. Now go back. The second reason is we got to live with a sense of purpose and urgency. Urgency is the sense when you wake up every day with a mission. Urgency is the sense that every single day you wake up knowing that I have to leverage my life because my time is finite. Remember, we said this a second ago, our time is a commodity. Did you ever notice that the words you talk about when you talk about time are money words? You spend your time like you spend your money. You waste your time like you waste your money. You invest your time like you invest your money. What would it look like if in the same way we invested our lives with a sense of urgency? It'll change everything for us. The author, David, in the book of Psalm, says this about it. He says, Lord, remind me how brief my time on earth will be. Remind me that my days are numbered, how fleeting my life is. Remind me of this, God. You have made my life no longer than the width of my hand. It's short. It's just here for a moment. My entire lifetime is just a moment to you. At best, each of us is but it's a breath. It's a breath. So we have to live our life with a sense of passion, purpose, and urgency. The second thing that's so important is this. We have to learn to put the first things first. This is about priority. One of the things you understand if you've ever had to pack a moving truck is you can't just start throwing stuff in or nothing will ever actually fit the way it's supposed to fit. How do you pack? You start by putting in the biggest, the oddest shape. You put those things in first, and then you begin to fill everything in around it. In the same way, your life is a limited amount of time. No single person that I know can accomplish everything that they need to accomplish with the time they have in their life. So how do you do the things God has for you? You prioritize and you say, what are the most important things in my life? And you do those first. Let me challenge you with this thought. Many of us give our first to something that doesn't matter. Many of us give our first waking moments of the day to Facebook, our first waking moments to Twitter or Instagram to see if you got any more likes on your selfie. That's what we do, right? What would it look like if God got the first of your day? The first 10, 15 minutes, God, I just want to know you more. God, I want to spend time knowing you through your word. I want to spend time in silence so you can speak to me. How different would your day be? An area for me where I prioritize this is in the area of my money. I want to make sure God knows he's first in my money. So every month, my tithe check, the first 10%, and honestly more than 10%, but the first 10% of every dollar I get, I give it automatically on the first of every month. Why? Because I want God to know he's first in every area of my life, and that includes my finances. Like, what are the areas in your life where you haven't prioritized correctly, and you found yourself looking back at the last year saying, man, where did that go? What if you could just have your social media time back? What if you could just have your TV watching time back? How different could your life be? We have to make the decision to prioritize our lives. Let me say it to you like this. At the end of your life, there will be a day when your family, your friends, your loved ones stand around and they memorialize you. Your life will be over. Whether you make it another 7 years or another 70 years, that they'll talk about your stories, the things you did that made them laugh. They'll tell the stories that just remind them of how loving and caring you are. They'll tell the stories of the things that made you quirky and unique. They'll tell those stories about you. And then they're going to say some things about you that you have some control over right now. It's how are you going to live your life? How are you going to prioritize your life? Like, I hope it said over me that, man, Jason was a guy who loved God, and it was evident in the way he loved and treated his family. It was evident in the way he loved and treated those people in his church. It's evident in the way that he loved and cared for his friends. It's evident in his life. My question to you this morning that's so important is this. When you think about your life, when you think about the difference God created you to make with your life, are you living it? Are you doing it? Are you like Daniel and you're leveraging your life in a way that's going to matter? Or are you like so many people who just kind of wasting away your life? What would it look like if all of us made this decision to lean in and say, God, listen, help me not to ignore the warning signs. Help me to see what you're up to so I can be a part of it. Help me, God, to discover my giftings, my talent, the reason and the purpose you made me for so I can actually live it out. Then what would it look like if all of us begin to live our life through that lens? I'll tell you what would happen. You would attack every day with a sense of purpose that you've never felt before. You would wake up in the morning every single day with the directive from God to leverage your life to make a difference, to change everything. So here's my challenge to you. How do you stand firm and love well in a culture of compromise? How do you use your life and use your voice to make a difference that's going to matter and echo into eternity? You begin to leverage your life, the limited resource you have, in a way that says, God, whatever you ask of me, I'll do. Whatever it costs, I'll give. Whatever you require from me, it's yours. It's all yours. You're first above every other thing. And then allow your life to fit into the gaps. It'll change everything for you. Would you bow your head and close your eyes with me all across this room? I'm going to pray with you now. Lord, in the same way you warned the king and you warned Daniel and those in Babylon through the writing on the wall, may this message, may your word be like a writing on the wall of our hearts. God, may we take heed, take caution to your warning. May we realize that our days are numbered. We're living on borrowed time. May we begin to understand that our life is going to be measured on a scale of some kind. Nothing wrong with having fun, but we want to make sure our lives matter. And God, we want to make sure that we heed and pay attention to the warnings you give to us. So God, I pray that this will become a church full of people who listen and hear your voice and who follow your command. Thank you for that, God.